All right, now we're on to page 2, which starts off easy, find the distance, and I'm going to do this 2 ways. Okay, some of you may like the distance formula. Oops, I'm going to need to move my line over. I didn't leave myself enough space. Plus, and you could do x2 minus x1 or x1 minus x2. It doesn't matter as long as you maintain the order. So I'm going to label my points x1, y1, x2, y2, and I'm just going to calculate. So I'm going to do negative 4 minus a negative 9 squared plus negative 3 minus a 4 squared. And like I said, negatives don't really matter, so negative 4 plus 9 is 5 squared. If you look at this one, that's a negative 7. You can write it there, but when you square it, it's always going to turn into a positive. Okay, so I get the square root of 25 plus 49, which equals the square root of 74. And you can leave your answer like that, or you could type it in the calculator to get the decimal approximation. Now, the second way I'm going to do it, start thinking logically about triangles. So the x direction is left to right. So from negative 4 to 9, I go 5 units. From negative 3 to 4, I got to go up to 0 by going 3 units, and then another 4, so I go 7. I would still end up with, if I use a squared plus b squared equals c squared. 5 squared plus 7 squared equals c squared. So in the end, I would still end up with the square root of 74. And the last option would be to just graph that out. I'm going to just use the straight up formula over here. So I'm going to write d equals the square root of. Okay, so I'm going to do 5 minus a negative 3 squared. That's my x1 minus x2. And then I'm going to do negative 7 minus a negative 6 squared, which turns into a positive. So I get the square root of 8 squared plus negative 1 squared. Remember, negative squared always turns into a positive. So I get 64 plus 1, which is the square root of 65. Again, you could graph that if you wanted. You could just draw triangles, same thing. And now we get to this easy one of the page. Okay, it says write the equation. So remember, the generic equation of a circle is x minus h squared, y minus k squared equals r squared, where h and k is your center, and r is your radius. So when I go to write my equation, I'm going to write x minus, my x coordinate of my center is 0, plus y minus a negative 4, which turns into a positive squared, equals my radius squared, which is 4 squared. And I always want you to rewrite that. So 4 squared is really, oh, I just dropped my marker and I can't reach it. 4 squared is really 16, right? So I want you to change that. So now we just need to go and graph. I'm going to go to my center, 0, and then down 4. And then my radius is 4, so I'm going to count right 4, down, left, 1, 2, 3, 4, up. And again, you just make your best approximation of a circle you can, and that's not that bad, right? This one was the killer on your quiz today. Diameter has endpoints 3, 5, negative 1, 3. So again, you got to think about the generic equation of a circle. So I need to find 3 things. Really 2. Center, radius, and I need to write the equation. Okay? So first step, if you're stuck, I gave you graph paper for a reason. You go 3 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my point. I'm going to do negative 1, 3. So there's my diameter. So hypothetically, our circle looks something like that. So we know we need to find the center, which you should be thinking, oh, I need to find the middle or the midpoint. So I'm just going to go over to my graph, and I'm going to guess it looks like it's about there. So we're going to guess it's 1, 4. But let's actually calculate it. So remember, we add our x's. So it'll be 3 plus negative 1 over 2 and 5 plus 3 over 2. Okay, so it's 2 over 2 and 8 over 2. So my midpoint is 1, 4, which actually is perfect. I graphed 1, 4. Okay, step 1 done. So I'm going to jump down to my equation here. So I rewrote it, but I just put blanks in for my center and my radius because I know that's what I need to fill in. So I know the x coordinate on my center is 1, and I know the y coordinate's 4, so I have almost all of my equation written in. Okay, now the last step is to find the radius. Now there's two ways you can do this. So you can use the distance formula between your two endpoints, so I'm going to do that first. So distance formula equals the square root of 3 minus negative 1 squared plus 5 minus 3 squared. I get 4 squared plus 2 squared, which is 16 plus 4. Now that is when I use the two endpoints over here. So to find the radius, I only want half of that. So I would divide that by 2. If you type that in your calculator, you get approximately 2.2. So that's using the distance formula. Okay, I'm going to go over to my graph though and make use of that because I have my midpoint nice here. I just really want to find that blue distance. So I have to go up 1 and over 2 to get there. So the second alternative way, which I like to use, is to just find it using Pythagorean theorem. So I have 1 squared plus 2 squared equals 1 plus 4, which is 5. And I have to get rid of the square, so I'm going to square root, which is also equal to 2.2. Now, I don't want to get a decimal approximation, but I could. So I could technically write 2.2 squared there and type that in my calculator. Or I could change that, because remember, if I just leave it as a square root, the square and the square root cancel out, so my final best equation would look like this. Okay. Now, if you got the 2.2 squared, and you squared that, you get 4.84, which if you showed all your work, that's giving you credit, okay? But if you just leave it as the square root of 5 up here, okay, when you square it, those are going to cancel out, so you just end up with 5. Right, so let's try the second one like this. Diameter is endpoints -4, -2. Step 1, graph it. So this one has a bigger circle. There's my diameter, so hypothetically, here's my circle. All right, so again, we need to find two things. Center, radius, and then write our equation. And I'm just going to go ahead and write x minus blank squared. So that's where my center goes, and the x and the y, and then my radius has to be squared as well. So center, you should be thinking midpoint. Okay, so I'm going to find the midpoint between these two, and it looks like to me it's about there. All right, so I'm going to do -4 plus 3 divide 2, and -2 plus 4 divide 2. So -4 plus 3 is 1/2, and that's going to be 1. Okay, so, oh, excuse me, not 1, -2, oh yeah. Oh goodness. -2 plus 4 is 2, divide 2 is 1. So really, it's at 1/2, comma 1, so my line's a little off. So there's really where my midpoint is. Oh, excuse me, that's a -1/2, because -4 plus 3 is -1. That's why I was going wrong. So there's my midpoint. I was a little bit off. Right? Now remember, we could use the distance formula to find the radius and then divide by 2. So I'm going to do that first with the two endpoints. Because if you forget to get the midpoint, at least you can find the distance. I'm going to do -4 minus 3 squared plus -2 minus 4 squared. So I get -7 squared plus -6 squared. And again, negatives don't matter. So I get 49 plus 36. Right, so square root of 49 plus 36. That gives me 85, and I'm going to square root it. What's over here? So square root of 85 is approximately 9.22. And remember, that's my whole diameter, so I'm going to divide that by 2. I get 4.61. So there's one option. So I can plug in my center of -1/2, which turned to positive, and 1. And then I could do 4.61 squared. The other option would be to count on your graph, but the issue is I started at a half here and 1. So the up part's easy. I just go up 3, but the over part I have to go over half, then 1, 2, 3, 3.5. So an alternative way to find the radius would be 3 squared plus 3.5 squared equals c squared. And you would still get 4.61 as your radius. And then when you plug it into the equation, don't forget to square it. So you should get, change this, you should square 4.61 squared and get 21.25. Again, 2 alternatives. You could find the distance from the graph, or you could use the distance formula. Don't forget, if you find it between the whole diameter, you do divide it by 2 at the end. Right? Last one on the first page is just basic graphing. So all you should say to yourself is, I need to find the center and the radius, but I don't actually need to do any calculating. So the center of that first one is 4, 4. And the radius, remember it's squared in the equation, so you need to take the square root. So you get 4, so it's a lot of 4s. 4. And then I count out 4, up 4, left 4, down 4. So that's the first one. Second one, there's nothing next to the x, there's nothing next to the y, so that must mean it's 0, 0 for my circle. Don't overthink that one. And in this case, I need to square root the 4, so my radius is 2. Don't forget in your equation, it's r squared, so you need to square root it. So I start at 0, 0, and I go out 2, up 2, left 2, down 2. Right, so that's the end of page 2. I hope I didn't go too fast. Please rewind it if you got stuck and ask some questions tomorrow. Move on to page 3 if you need some help.